All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So if we want to start making our way in, that'd be great. Stand with me this morning as we start in a time of praise and worship and song. This song is called Praises. Be lifted up. Sing praises to your name. Praises to your name. The name that's so much higher than all names. All honor to your name. Honor to your name. The name that's so much greater than all names. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. I sing praises to your name. Oh, praises to your name. The name that's so much greater than all names. All honor to your name. Honor to your name. The name that's so much greater than all names. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up. Be lifted higher. Be lifted up, be lifted higher, be lifted up, be lifted higher. Your name is life. Your name is hope inside me. Hope inside me. Your name is love. A love that always finds me. Always finds me. Your name is life. A love is hope inside me. Hope inside me. Your name is love, a love that always finds me, always finds me. Be lifted up, be lifted higher, be lifted up, be lifted higher. Lifted up, be lifted higher, splendor of the King, clothed in majesty. Let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And oh, we'll see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands. Beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead, 3 in 1. Oh, you are Father, Spirit, Son, Lion and the Lamb, Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And oh, we'll see how great is our God. Well, he's the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. Well, he's the name above all names, worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. Well, how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And oh, we'll see how great is our God. Amen, amen. I'm just going to ask this question this morning, and it's okay if it's nobody, but is there anybody out there this morning that has just a praise this morning? Something they'd like to give God glory and honor for this morning? All right, it's all right. If you think of something later, let me know. I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Empty praise, and treasures that fade, never enough. Then you came along, and you put me back together. Now every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all. You still call me friend. 'cause the God of the mountain, he's the God of the valley, and there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, and I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like. Oh, but I heard the tender whisper of love in dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers, far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, it's love so undeniable. I can hardly speak, and it's peace so unexplainable. I hardly think as you call me, deeper still as you call me, deeper still as you call me, deeper still into love, love, love. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. Sing that again with me, church. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. As Claire comes up here for communion, we'll sing it one more time. Oh, God, you're so good. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me.
All right, I think it's my turn now. Sweet. We're going to get ready. If you want to sit down, feel free. We're going to get ready to take communion. It's just a time to remember Jesus' death on the cross and what that means for our relationship with God and the way it's restored. But there are 3 separate times in the Gospels where the voice of God is recorded. 2 of the times God says the exact same thing. He's speaking to Jesus, and he says, "You are my beloved, who I'm well pleased with." And the third time where not really, it's around the third time he's talking about Jesus' glory and the way it's going to be restored, but the way he has already brought glory to him. And right before Jesus' death, Jesus is praying with his disciples, and he's praying for future believers, and he says, "May they know that I have loved them as I have loved you," in reference to the way he loves Jesus is the same way he views us. And there's just something about the way God was so excited and willing to open the heavens to declare Jesus' identity before other people and say, "This is my son, I love him so dearly, I take delight in him. And that God sees us the same way. That I think us celebrating communion could be a celebration of Jesus' willingness to come experience this horrendous death so that our relationship with the Father could be restored and that we can live into the identity of being his dearly beloved. So I'm going to pray, and then during this next song, as you want to, come on up, grab the elements, and take communion on your own. My dad's laughing at me, but I'm going to pray right now. God, thank you that we get to celebrate this right now. Thank you that far in advance you chose your son to be the perfect sacrifice for us, that you weren't going to let anything stand in the way of us having a relationship with you. God, we're thankful that you choose us to be the vessel of your Spirit, that you allow us to be in relationship with you who is so holy and greater than we'll ever be. God, thank you for this time. We ask that if there's any way we can spend this time that would bring you joy, that you make that clear to us. And thank you that we get to be in remembrance of your love. Amen.
Crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. So make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. In the crushing, in the pressing, you are making new wine. In the soil I now surrender, you are breaking new ground. Oh, you are breaking new ground. Make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power. There is new freedom, and the kingdom is near. I lay down my old flame, carry your new fire today. 'Cause where there is new wine, there is new power. There is new freedom, and the kingdom is here. I lay down my old flame, carry your new fire today. So make me a a vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. So make me a vessel. Make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. God, I came here with nothing, but all you have given me. Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Oh, Jesus, bring new wine out of me. Amen, amen. At this time, kids are dismissed to Children's Church. And I'll give Pastor Scott a moment to come up here. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everybody. Before we get started here, Hillary had something that she was just sharing with me that I just put her on the spot and asked her if she wouldn't mind sharing with the rest of us. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Hi, guys. So I was just telling Pastor Scott, this week my family found itself in like one of those situations that you're like never thinking, man, when I grow up, I hope my family gets to go through that, you know? Just kind of a crisis type of situation. And I really reflected back to when Pastor Scott was talking about Hezekiah and how, you know, the Assyrians were right there. You know, they had already taken cities and towns, you know. All Hezekiah had left, if I remember right, was the capital. And so it was happening, you know. He was there in that hard place. And I just keep reflecting on how God is so faithful. And when my family was going through that situation where the devil is on our turf, you know, he's doing these things. They are happening. That God had already put in place the people that we would need to walk through it with us. And, you know, I'm so grateful for God's faithfulness in that. The people that are walking with us through that, you know, it's just crazy to think sometimes I tend to be a Peter, you know, like it's happening, you know, when the mob shows up and I'm like, hold on, Jesus, I'll chop their ear off. You know, I tend to be a Peter, and Jesus is like, sit down. Like, I didn't ask you to do that. Like, I just need you to sit down and trust me and trust my plan. And, you know, what did Hezekiah do when he's like losing people? You know, he's losing land, and he went before God, and God was like, well, just relax, you know. It's really hard to do that in those situations, especially when your family's being threatened and you know, everything you feel comfortable with is kind of shaky and rocky, you know, but God is so, so faithful, and I just am praising him, and I'm just so grateful to him that, you know, he knew we would come to this, and, you know, he had already set up these provisions so that I could sit down and I could just rest in him and trust him because he is so good, you know, and he will work it all out as long as I don't go in chopping ears off and getting crazy and trying to, you know, overdo him and help him. I'm helping him, you know, but he doesn't need my help. He's already got it all set up because he is just so faithful and he is just so good. So I'm just praising him this week for all of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Praise God. Man, well, we've got another one this week. I don't know if you've noticed, this wasn't my intention. It's just kind of what God did. That as we've been going through our series, The Story, the past several weeks, there's been a lot of recurring themes. There's been a lot of recurring themes. And there's going to be some more this morning that you're going to notice too. These people who are just stuck between a rock and a hard place and don't have a lot of options, and the things that God is able to do to get them out when we just trust him and we're faithful to him. And so praise God for that. So I think most of you know, if I come across kind of weird, it's because I am. I'm a weird person. I can only blame genetics so much, although my family is very weird. One of the things that I blame, and it's certainly not the only thing, is that I'm actually African. Well, I'm not really African. I'm not African American either. I'm more American African American. So all that to say, I'm a U.S. citizen, but I grew up in Africa for a large part of my childhood. And okay, I was like, man, I'm off to a bad start. They're coming to take me away. Thank you. Man, two big guys coming right at you like that. Out to lunch maybe, but yeah, I just need my beater to jump. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know what I was talking about. Probably Africa. So I grew up in Africa. My parents were missionaries, so a big part of my childhood. Some of the time we were in the U.S., some of the time we were in Africa. And but there's this thing that happens. There's this phenomenon known as third culture kids. Anybody heard that term before? No? Anybody here identify as a third culture kid? Maybe you can relate to this a little bit. So a third culture kid is a person who grows up, their childhood is in a culture that is not really technically their own culture. And this is something that's experienced a lot by, kids of missionaries, of military families that have to move around a lot, or what have you. If you have a parent that has some kind of line of work where there's a lot of travel, or even just your parents are like immigrants, right? You move to another country. It's just kind of this weird thing where you never really feel like any people are your people. Like you just kind of get used to feeling like the outsider, and it kind of sticks with you into adulthood. I've basically been that way my whole life. Like I don't know if I've ever been in a group of people and felt like, yes, these are my people. I understand them and they understand me, and I can say the thing that I'm thinking and they all know what I mean. It's like, no, I've always been weird. I say things that I didn't think it was weird until I said it out loud, and then it was, or I've just kind of always been that way. And so growing up, I would experience this both ways. So, we'd go to Africa, and we'd be there for a couple years, and you just, walk down the street, and I'm like, just white kid walking down the street, going to my friend Johnny's house, and there's, all the local kids, that are around, they see me walking down the street, and they start yelling, Mzungu, Mzungu, which means white person, and they start, trying to use any English phrase they know, like, good morning, teacher, or this is Radio 1, or, just whatever English they've heard, like, trying to communicate with the foreigner in his native tongue, and, and I didn't know their language, and my parents tried, but it didn't take with me and my brothers. Anyway. But, it kind of have that experience and be the outsider, be different from everybody around you, walk down the street and just like, there's no hiding it. Like in college, I got to go to Germany for a summer. And what was cool about Germany was like, nobody would have guessed I wasn't German until I opened my mouth, Like I look German, but like in Africa, like walking around, yeah, you look like a foreigner. You don't look like you're from around here, especially me. Like of all my, some people get a better tan than I did. Yeah, you look at my complexion, you wouldn't know that I ever set foot outside of Michigan. But, or you might think I am German. But, you're just like weird, you're different. And then we would come back to the States. We'd be in Africa for a couple years, we'd come back to the States for a year. And it was just like, yeah, we're going back home. Except I don't have any idea what's going on. People talk different than me, they look different than me, they dress different than me. They're referring to I don't even know who Britney Spears is, which now I know is a blessing. But, at the time it was just like, I don't know who that is. I don't understand what's going on, just really completely out of touch, And then we'd go back to Africa again. And it was just kind of this back and forth growing up. And you know, it just, I've always, in any situation, it's just kind of stuck with me. I don't feel like I'm with my people. Now there's exceptions to that, you know, like I feel at home with my family for the most part, you know, like me and my siblings, when we get together, we have all these inside jokes and all these life experiences that we like shared. Like the only people of my culture are my brothers, you know, because like we had our culture growing up, you know, like our own little weird, isolated, you know, the stuff that we were into and whatever videos we happen to have on tape, you know, that we'd watch over and over and that kind of thing. Like we just had our own weird life experiences, and the only people who really completely get it are the people that, like the few of us that did it together. But for the most part, I usually feel like an outsider, and I'm just kind of used to it. You know, I don't know how not to feel that way. And I bet that you felt that way before. I bet that you have circles where you more or less feel at home, you feel comfortable, you trust the people around you, you feel like they know you, you feel like they accept you. You probably have, I hope you have some kind of environment, some kind of group of people where you feel that way. And I will tell you, I feel that way with this church family. From day one, I like, you guys have made me feel like I've always been here, which is crazy. Like, I don't normally feel that way, right? I always feel like I just got here. I always feel like the new guy, but I've from day one with this church family, I've always felt extremely welcome, and it's been a blessing. But I bet you've got people that you feel comfortable around. You feel part of that group. And then you've probably been in environments where you're like, oh, you're different than me. I'm different than you. I'm the weird one here. Right? Like, I don't look like you. I don't talk like you. You do things that I don't understand. You know, I do things that seem perfectly normal, and you make fun of me for it. You know, have you ever been in that kind of situation, right? You're just kind of completely out of your element, right? And realizing that you don't really fit in here. You're not really one of these people. You're not one of us. Maybe you've even been in situations where somebody wanted to make it clear to you, you're not one of us, right? A lot of us, I think, a lot of Christians these days, the more time goes on, being a Christian in America, I feel weird and out of place being a Christian in America. You know, and there's always been some truth to that, even at times where a lot more people went to church. You know, not everybody took it seriously, and actually taking a stand and actually being faithful to Jesus has always been pretty radical in any society, any culture. But like, you know, there have been times in American history where being a Christian got you some mileage, right? Where all the politicians at least pretended to be, right? Maybe they were, or maybe they were pretending, but at least they pretended to be because it scored them points with people. And that's not so true anymore, you know? Like that's kind of losing steam, right? In the media, if you watch TV, where are the Christians? You know, you get like this Hollywood stereotype of what a Christian is like, you know, like a Ned Flanders type. And, you know, it's just like, I don't know anybody like that. You know, like sometimes it's like, oh yeah, poking fun at us. Like, yeah, that's fair. But most of the time it's just like, have you ever met a Christian before? Like, I don't think you even know. Like, I don't think you even know anything about Jesus or about what it means to follow, you know. And that doesn't represent all of America. That's just what's coming out of Hollywood. But all that to say, the point I'm getting at is I feel increasingly as time goes on, being a Christian makes me stick out more as time goes on. I feel this in the workplace, you know. I feel this when I watch TV. Anytime I spend time on the internet, anytime I'm watching or listening to the news, you know. Just out and about, just more and more, I feel kind of different from people around me just for wanting to know Jesus more, you know? And we've seen this trajectory as we've been going through the story, and we see the story of Scripture, see from all the way from the beginning when God first created the world, God makes people. We see this trajectory where God picks Abraham and says, this world is broken, people have turned from me, but I'm going to use you, I'm going to use your family to draw the world back to me. And you see Abraham moves, God calls him to leave his home to go to this foreign place, right? And his descendants, they grow and, you know, like kind of start growing in number, but then they end up in Egypt for a while and they're slaves there, they're foreigners, they don't belong. God delivers them from there, says, I'm going to give you this land that I promised to Abraham. He leads them, they wander in the desert, they're wanderers and nomads for 40 years. He brings them, finally, they come into the promised land. They start settling the land, but they're the new people. They're the foreigners, and actually a military threat to the people there, and there's a lot of conflict, but over time, they start to settle into the land, and it's like, this land is the land of God's people. This land is where Yahweh is worshipped and no other gods. Kind of, but then you get, even then, like, they're not always doing a great job of it, right? And so actually being serious about following God's law kind of makes you stick out. It makes you an outsider among God's own people, right? We've seen that a lot going through the story. And then we get to this point now, especially this age of kings, we have one king after another who, for the most part, do not care about God at all, right? And you have moments like where we saw Elijah just being like, God, I'm the last one. I'm the only one left. God's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I have actually several thousand people who have not bowed the knee to a false god that are still faithful to me. And you'll see that soon, you know. But we've seen this theme of people who are serious about following God are not always the ones with the power, right? Hezekiah, Josiah, David, those guys have the power to do something about it, right? But a lot of people don't. And now we've seen where the Israelites are all in exile, right? First, the Assyrians came and took the northern kingdom of Israel. Then the Babylonians came, we saw that last week, took the southern kingdom of Judah, took them captive, left some of the poorer people to work the land so it doesn't get completely overgrown and stuff and taken over by wild animals. But the Israelites, by and large, have been taken captive, taken hostage to a foreign nation where they're going to be forced to assimilate with that culture, right? The wealthy and educated people are going to be taken to the king's palace where they're going to be enticed into by being in the king's palace, by being supplied food from the king's palace, are going to be sort of enticed into embracing the culture. And everybody else is just going to kind of be forced to mingle with the people that they're living among and marry with them until over time, being an Israelite doesn't mean anything anymore. And there are no people of Israel left. That's the goal. For the Assyrians and the Babylonians, that's what they're going for. Well, now we come to this point. Towards the beginning of the exile, or at the beginning of the exile, one of the young men, or there's 4 young men actually we're going to look at this morning, who were taken into exile, and they come from the royal house in Judah, in Jerusalem, right? Meaning they probably have some kind of familial relationship with the royal family from the line of David, or maybe they just they're nobles, right? But whatever the case, they come from the royal household, they come from nobility, and so they are brought into the king's palace. And what King Nebuchadnezzar, the king that came and we saw last week, laid siege to Jerusalem and took it over, that same king now, we're going to see that he's starting sort of a program. What he wants to do as part of his assimilation effort is he takes some of these promising young men from these various people groups that they have conquered and taken captive back to Babylon. And he wants to kind of train them, educate them. Basically, he wants to send them to Babylonian college so they can be good and indoctrinated, right? And then they can kind of be part of his inner circle of advisors, right? And kind of maybe bring some diversity to the table. Maybe that's part of what he's going for. But really, he wants them to think like Babylonians. He wants to make them into good Babylonian nobility, right? And so that's kind of his strategy. And so we see there's 4 young Israelite men from the tribe of Judah that we're going to look at today. The main one being Daniel. So Daniel wrote a whole book. It's 12 chapters long. I encourage you to read it. But that's where we're going to be focusing on. We're going to focus on the first several chapters here. But it says in Daniel chapter 1 that the king kind of has this plan. He kind of has an official in charge of picking these guys out and recruiting them and training them. They're going to spend 3 years studying Babylonian literature, Babylonian religious beliefs, Babylonian history and culture, right? Maybe some music thrown in there, right? And along with that, they're going to be supplied food from the royal household, right? Like they're going to, in some sense, sort of dine at the king's table, but probably not literally, but at least they're supplied food, they're supplied rations from the king's house. And this, again, is part of, now you're dependent on me, king of Babylon. You're part of my household. I'm taking care of you. You don't really have any say or any power or any agency. You're part of my thing now, right? And so there's this moment where part of this training program, they're in the king's general household and they're receiving food. And we don't know exactly what the issue is with the food, but they find themselves in a moral dilemma. Most likely what's going on is that the food they're being supplied is not kosher, right? The Israelites, they had a law. And in faithfulness to God, they're supposed to keep the covenant that they made with God by following the law that he gave them. And there's a lot of dietary restrictions with that, right? And so most likely what's going on is the food that they're being supplied is not kosher. And so they say to the official that's in charge of them, Daniel and his 3 friends that we're going to talk more about in a little bit here, they say like, hey, we can't eat this food. And the official's like, well, like, if you're going to eat the food, like, if you don't eat this food, then the king will have my head. Like, it's not really up for negotiation. And they're like, well, no, we really can't. But hey, tell you what, test us in this. Just give us, now your translation probably says vegetables. It really might actually just be like basic seeds or grains, that they can make into some kind of bread without a lot of nutrition in it. Or there's probably something along the lines of what they're talking about, some kind of barley seeds or something. But basically, just give us the bare minimum. We don't need any of the wine or the fancy food. Just give us that. Give us water. And give us 10 days to test this out. Just give us 10 days and see how it turns out, right? And so they do this for 10 days. And by the end of it, it says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 15, it says, at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine, and they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. That's going to be really important as we go on. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Right? So already, these young men, they're already at the top of the class. And what did they do? They ate kosher, even if it meant they didn't have great nutrition, and they trusted that God was going to make it work somehow. Now, this is subtle, and it doesn't seem like a big deal, but this is the start of something. They're setting a precedent here. See, these guys are going to repeatedly be put in a situation, in situations where they don't really have a lot of power, where they will be called upon to do things, to participate in things, to even lead things and be in charge of things that would require them to disobey God or dishonor God in some way or betray God in some way. And they're going to be routinely required to do things like that. Now, with that, there's some status. They're going to get some authority. They're in this exclusive program, that only select young men get to be in. They got to be smart and sharp and handsome and all this other stuff. Of course, they got to be just like King Saul, right? Tall and handsome, right? But these are always part of the requirements. But, these are gifted young men that just all around, really likable guys, really promising guys, right? And they're at the top of the class. But they're with this, they don't really have a say. They don't really have any freedom. They're going to be given authority and responsibility, but not in like a fun, own your own business kind of way where things are going well and you have some say over your life, more in like a owning your own business kind of way where you have no say over your life and you just work crazy hours and you're kind of at the mercy of things that you can't control, right? They're kind of in this situation where they don't really have a lot of say, so they don't have a lot of freedom. But what are they going to do then when they face these situations where it's really a choice between honoring God or staying alive, right? Where it's a choice between honoring God or honoring the people who have the power to have you killed on a moment's notice if they just feel like it, if they're just in a bad mood that day, right? How are they going to handle this situation where they are the outsiders, they are the foreigners, they don't really have any power here? But what are you supposed to do? Turn your back on God? Worship false gods like the Babylonians do? This is the first encounter like this that they have. And we see what they do is, in a non-confrontational way, not looking for trouble, right? They're not, on the one hand, they're not like just cowering and saying, yes, sir, we'll eat whatever you give us. We'll worship whatever God you tell us to. Yes, we'll just completely assimilate. We'll give up our culture. We'll give up our God. Like, they don't say that. On the other hand, they don't like barge into the king's, throne room and say, I defy you, and by God, we will not eat your food, and we'll, they don't make a big stand-up, show of it, right? It's not like a big showdown. It's not a big battle. They don't approach it that way. They just very tactfully, calmly tell this official who's in charge of giving them their food, hey, buddy, we can't eat this stuff. He's like, well, what do you want me to do? He's going to kill me if you don't eat this stuff. Well, just trust us here. We don't have to tell him. He doesn't have to know what's going on. Just give it a shot for 10 days and see what happens. Do they know what's going to happen? No. Right? But they're like, well, give us 10 days to not die, where you don't have to die and we don't have to die, and we'll see what happens, right? And you know what God does? God's faithful to them. God carries them through that. God, miraculously, because the implication is whatever nutrition they're getting, it's not as good. But God, through this time, actually makes them healthier, stronger, better, just puts nutrients in them somehow or another. There's an angel coming and injecting some vitamins in their arm every night or something, right? That they're looking better and healthier and just all around them more energy and more clean cut than all the other guys around them, right? This is a precedent. This is an important precedent that we're going to see this pattern continue of the way that they're going to try to walk this tightrope between being faithful to God without sticking their necks out either, right? It's a very interesting strategy. We could learn a lot from this. I hope we will. All right, so then in chapter 2, it says in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he has a dream. It says in verse 1, his mind was troubled and he could not sleep, so the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Right? So he gets all of his wise guys in, all the king's horses and all the king's men. Right? He brings them all in, all these wise guys. Their job is to know stuff. Their job is to figure stuff out for him, to give him good advice, to tell him what the gods want, that kind of stuff. What the stars aligning means, And they're like, yeah, no problem. Just tell us the dream. We can interpret it for you. But he says in verse 5b, he says, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So, tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Oh, okay, is that all we have to do? Oh, we just have to read your mind and then also tell you what your crazy thoughts mean. Yeah, no problem, right? Naturally, they're like, buddy, that's weird. We can't do that. Nobody can do that. And the king's like, no, I don't trust you. Because if I tell you what the dream, you're just going to make something up. I don't trust what you tell me. I'm only going to trust you that you claim to have some kind of special insight, some kind of access to the gods that other people don't have, that you can tell something by the stars of what's going to happen that other people don't know. You claim to have some kind of special knowledge. Prove it to me by telling me what the dream even was. And they're like, nobody has ever, where are you getting this from? This is unprecedented. Nobody has ever made a request like that. Nobody on earth could possibly fulfill a request like that. It's not going to happen. There's just no way. What you're asking is impossible. And so the king says, okay, I'll just have you all killed. Too bad. I guess I'll never know what the dream meant. It's so he gives an order that all his wise guys, all the king's horses and all the king's men need to be killed. And so you know what? You know who that's going to include? Our buddy Daniel and his 3 friends. And I forgot to mention his friends, so they all have their Hebrew names, but part of the assimilation process is they're all given Babylonian names, right? So Daniel we know better by his Hebrew name, typically. His 3 friends that we're going to keep referring to as the 3 friends because their names are long, but their names that they're better known by are their Babylonian names, which are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? We'll get to them. That might conjure something up. You're like, oh, those guys. I think I heard a story about that. Right, we'll get to that story. But anyway, those guys are on the chopping block too, right? If all the wise guys are getting killed, that's going to include them. So Daniel and his friends, they hear about this. So Daniel asks a royal official to ask the king, hey, give us time. Before you kill us, before you kill anybody. He doesn't say, oh, go kill those guys, just don't kill us, right? He says, hold on, give us time. Give us time. Let us pray to our God and see what happens. So Daniel and his friends, they pray. Right? And then it says in chapter 2, verse 19, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, and this is important, I'm going to actually read this because this is kind of sort of in a lot of ways a thesis statement for the whole book of Daniel. He says, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Right? This is important because this is what the rest of the book of Daniel is. It is Daniel and his three buddies being put in these kinds of situations where it is literally life or death. And they have to choose, am I going to follow the advice of other people and live the way everybody else is living and turn my back on God, and maybe that will help me live and survive this particular crisis? Or do I trust God and maybe die for it because I don't know what God's going to do? But time and again, we see that for those who are faithful to God, God helps them out of that pinch. And God continually demonstrates to Babylonian kings, hey, buddy, I know you think you're the king of the world because you're the king of this massive empire that has taken over like all of the world that you know of. I'm the king of you. You serve at my pleasure. And if I ever want to pull the cord on this thing, I sure will. And you won't make it long, right? You only have your position because I have allowed you to have that position. And that is going to be something that God is continually trying to teach these kings. We'll see more of that. So Daniel goes before the king, and the king says, hey, so can you really do this? Can you interpret the dream and tell me what it means? Can you tell me what the dream was? And Daniel says at first, well, no, of course not. Nobody can do that. Thanks for wasting my time. He's like, hold on, but he says in verse 228, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So he says, here's your dream. I won't give you the whole thing. It's like this statue, and it's made of different materials. It's like gold at the top and then silver and bronze, and then it's kind of like mixed stuff and clay at the bottom. And he says, this is what your dream was. And he says, this is what it means. Basically, God is predicting these 4 kingdoms that are going to come after the Babylonian kingdom. And historians, there's a little bit of slight, dispute about okay, is when the Romans or the Greeks? And anyway, I won't bore you with all of that. But basically, he predicts what's going to happen over the next few centuries. And he predicts the way certain things are going to go down. And then he says, in the dream, there's this statue, and then this giant rock comes out of nowhere, like a meteor or something, and crushes the statue, breaks it. The whole thing falls apart. It just turns into dust and blows away with the wind. But that rock that breaks it turns into a mountain, and that mountain stays put. It's not going anywhere. And he says, what that means is that God is going to establish his own kingdom. All these kingdoms will rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall. And hey, buddy, don't worry. None of them are going to be as great as yours, buddy, Nebuchadnezzar. Don't worry. Yours is the best one. Don't worry about it. None of them are going to quite live up to you, but kingdoms will rise and fall after you and rise and fall after you. And then God will establish his kingdom, and his kingdom will only ever rise, and it will not fall. It will stay put forever. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is astounded and very excited about it, and realize part of this too that Daniel makes very clear to him is you are king because God rose you up as a king for his own purposes. God allowed you to get to the position you're in, and you are only here at his mercy. Right? Now, how does Nebuchadnezzar respond to that? Right? So on the one hand, there's some stuff he's saying that if you are literal king of the world, you're not going to like the part where your kingdom falls. You're not going to like the part where this God that you don't worship is going to establish his own kingdom, and it's going to last forever, but yours won't, and your gods won't do anything for you. You don't like the sound of that. On the other hand, he told me what my dream was. I thought I was going to have to kill everybody and never get an answer, and he knew what the dream was. He knows something here. He has access to something that other people don't. There's something special going on here. So here's in verse 46, it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him, right? Treating him like a god. It says, the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. That's a good response to show that kind of honor to Yahweh, the one true God. It says, then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. Right? Wow. Another crisis averted. And more than that, God has demonstrated something, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the king of the world, heard the message and received it and accepted it. Right? He's like, you're right. Your God is the God. He is the king of all the kings. Like, he is above everybody, and there's nothing I can do about that. Like, he accepts that. Well, for now, in chapter 3, we see then King Nebuchadnezzar, he builds this statue, and it's about 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, and it's a golden statue, probably not made of solid gold, that'd be pretty difficult, wouldn't work real well, like from an engineering perspective, but probably made of some kind of other metal or stone and then coated in gold, right? But very, very ornate, very big, like 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, like that's a big statue. Now, we don't know what it's a statue to or of, like maybe it's Nebuchadnezzar, maybe it's one of their gods, maybe the fact that Daniel doesn't even tell us as he's writing this down, he doesn't even record who the statue was for, maybe he's trying to say something by that. Like, it doesn't even matter who it's to because it wasn't for Yahweh, right? And whoever else it was for doesn't matter because they're dust, and Yahweh still reigns as king, right? But he gathers all the important people, all of his officials, and everybody, out to dedicate this statue. And they're like, okay, we're going to play some music. It's kind of like musical chairs, except it's like musical worship the idol. Like basically when you hear the music, everybody bow down and worship this thing like a god, right? Like that's what we're going to do now. It's mandatory, compulsory, everybody do it, ready, go, right? And they start the music, they're bowing down, except guess who's not bowing down, right? Here we are again. Could Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's who we're going to focus on. We don't know where Daniel is in this story, but could those three guys, what do they do? Could they bow down to save their necks? And if they ask God for forgiveness for it later, they repent, they really feel sorry, and they're like, Lord, we're so sorry, we shouldn't have done that, and like repent for it later, would God forgive them? I think he would. If they genuinely repented of it later, you're like, yeah, God is full of grace and mercy. He would take them back, right? They could do this thing, like, oh, by the way, I didn't mention, they say when the music starts, bow down and worship it, and if you don't, we have this furnace, this huge furnace, probably this big kiln that they used to make the statue. We're going to just throw you into it, right? Like, that's not a normal death penalty that they do. They're getting pretty creative here, right? Remember when I said a few months ago, Samson was like a real artist? I kind of feel that way about Nebuchadnezzar too. It's like, I'm going to cut you up into pieces and tear your house down. I'm going to throw you into this furnace. Later, we're going to deal with lions. It's just like, man, how do you think of this stuff? Anyway, yeah, like, okay, so there's a pretty real threat here. So what do they do? Do they just give in for now, just a little bit? Like maybe they could bow down and say, I'm not bowing to the statue, I'm bowing to Yahweh. Lord, I'm worshiping you right now. You know that. I know that. There's a lot of options. You know what they choose to do? They don't make a fuss. They don't make a show of it. But they don't bow down either. And there's some people that notice that. And they go to the king and say, hey, you notice those guys over there? They're not bowing down. And so the king, he likes these guys. They're doing well. They're top of the class, right? He's like, hey, guys, is this true? Like, he's furious with them. And they're like, is this true? And he says, and they say, yeah, we're not going to bow down. And he says, okay, this is your last chance. Like, you have one more shot to get this right, or I'm going to throw you in the furnace. And he says in chapter 3, verse 15, he says, then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Oh, really? The highest court in the land, you don't need to defend yourselves? They say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Wow. The composure to be able to say something like that in that moment to the king as he is furious and screaming at you and ready to burn you with fire, burn you to death. And their response is, hey, you know what? We're not afraid because our God is able to deliver us from your hand. And then you know what they say? Even if he doesn't, it doesn't change our answer. So they're not 100% confident like they haven't heard the Bible stories about themselves. Like they don't know that this is, I keep saying this, like the people in the Bible didn't know they were in the Bible, right? They didn't know how this story was going to end. They didn't know there was going to be a miracle here. I'm sorry, spoiler, there's going to be a miracle here. They don't know that. They say, even if he doesn't, though, even if God, in his wisdom, in his justice, in his mercy, in his love, being the kind of God that he is totally capable of saving us right now, and we trust him. And even if God does not save us from you and you burn us to death, even then we trust him. And we're not going to worship any made-up gods because we know the one true God, and we're going to be faithful to him no matter what the cost. So if we survive this thing, we want you to know where we stand. We're not going to worship these gods. We're going to worship the one true God. We're not going to worship you or anybody else. We want you to know that. But if we don't make it out of this, we still stand by that statement. It says, guess what happens? He throws him in the furnace, right? They tie him up. He brings in like his best, toughest, biggest soldiers to like throw them in the furnace. And he says, turn it up 7 times hotter, which I don't know how accurately they can measure that, but it's just like, okay, let's make it really hot, even hotter than usual. This is really hot. Like we're talking at least like 1,100 degrees here, centigrade. So that's pretty hot. I've never been in temperatures like that before, right? This is pretty bad. I don't know if it would even be that painful, or you would just instantly be gone, like be vapor at that point. But so that's the plan. They're going to throw him in there. The soldiers bring him in, bound up, all tied up. And as they're throwing him in, it's burning so hot, the soldiers die on the spot as they're trying to throw these 3 guys in. But they fall in, they throw him in there. And then, in verse 24, it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire to them. Wow. Okay. I mean, it still would have been a miracle if they lost their eyebrows, or their clothes burned off, or they at least smelled like a furnace or like a kiln or something. But no, God went all out here. He didn't miss anything. Nope, you would not know that they have ever been near a fire before. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Wow. Nebuchadnezzar is starting to piece this together, right? He's like, maybe the people I should be cutting into pieces are not the people who serve Yahweh, but everybody who says anything bad about Yahweh. Those are the people we're going to start cutting up into pieces and turning their houses to rubble. Right? So these 3 guys get a promotion, right? And then in chapter 4, we don't know how much time has passed, but Nebuchadnezzar has another weird dream. I don't know what he's smoking before he goes to bed, but he keeps having these weird dreams. And this time he goes straight to Daniel, right? And we actually have it appears that he's writing a letter to Daniel, or writing a letter about this later to somebody else, and that's actually what Daniel records for us. But so he has another dream. His wise guys can't figure it out. He calls in Daniel, and Daniel says, here's what's going on. Nebuchadnezzar tells him the dream first, and in this time he actually tells him what the dream is. But he says there's this giant tree, right? And it's massive. It stretches all the way up to the heavens. It stretches all the way to the ends of the earth, just this massive tree. And it's got lots of fruit in it, and there's birds, making nests in the branches, and there's wild animals just living under this tree, living off of its fruit, right? And then an angel comes, a messenger from heaven comes and says, cut down the tree. Leave the roots, leave the stump there, but scatter all the animals, right? And he says some other things. So he asks Daniel what it means, and Daniel says, well, you're not going to like this. I wish this was about somebody else, but it's about you. He says, you're the tree. You're the tree. You're this great king over a great empire, and all of these animals, so much of the world depends on you for their well-being and their wealth and for things going well and for their protection, right? He says, but God's going to cut you down. To quote Johnny Cash, sooner or later, God's going to cut you down, right? He says, God's going to cut down your tree, and you're going to live like a wild animal. You're going to live like an animal among the animals until there will be a time when you look up to heaven, when you acknowledge God and worship him as God and repent, and then God will return your sanity to you, and you will go back to living among people, and you'll be restored as king of Babylon. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, a year later, this happens. I should mention before we get to that, Daniel says in verse 27, therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. Right? So Daniel's even saying, hey, buddy, I don't know what God's going to do, but if you turn this ship around now, maybe you don't have to go through this. Well, about a year later, the king is like walking on the roof of his palace, just looking out over his kingdom. And he says, is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Right? Just like we all do. In an afternoon, you go out on your roof and look out over your yard and say, man, I am the best. Am I not the best? I'm so great. Look at everything I've accomplished, right? Just like one does. And even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by. We don't really know what that means. Maybe 7 years or something. I don't know. Who knows? But 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. And instantly, he just goes crazy. We don't know exactly how the transition happens, This is starting to feel like a 90s movie, where like all of a sudden a wild animal is like the king of Babylon or something, I don't know. It's weird, but all of a sudden he's not acting like a person. He's acting like an animal. And he ends up out there living with animals, right? He eats grass like an ox. He wakes up every morning. Have you ever slept out under the open sky, under the stars? You know what happens when you wake up in the morning? You're soaked. You're like, oh, this is why we tend to sleep in shelters. This is why people invented shelter to live in. It's because otherwise you get wet with all the morning dew on you, right? But he's just out there like an animal, like waking up every morning soaked with the morning dew, eating grass, just living like a wild animal among the wild animals, and not in like a fun Tarzan way, or like a fun George of the Jungle way, but like in a nasty, scary way, right? And then after 7 times, whatever that means, all of a sudden, he praises God. He acknowledges the one true God. And instantly, his sanity is restored, and he becomes king. He comes back home. His officials actually seek him out and find him and bring him back in, and he's back to his senses, and he returns as king and actually is an even more prosperous and highly regarded king after that. But here's his accounting of that time. He says, at the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. And he's about to get a little poetic here. He says, his dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. So he kind of gets it, right? Here's this king, this awful guy. Realize the atrocities he has committed. The people groups that he has just invaded, sovereign nations, and taken people as slaves, and killed people, and tortured and maimed people. Right? And the people who survive, he takes back and makes them assimilate, makes them give up their culture and their religious beliefs and assimilate with his people. This is the kind of guy who does all this and he's proud of it. He thinks it makes him awesome. He doesn't feel morally concerned about this. He thinks this makes him right, because if he was wrong, he would have lost. But clearly the gods are with him. Clearly he must be a god, because nobody can stand up to him. He keeps winning. All he does is win, 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 no matter what, right? You know, like that is his perspective on life. And you know what God does? Something nobody's ever heard of before or since. It's like, you're an animal now. Like, you're acting like an animal, you're going to be an animal. Go live with the animals for a while. And much like anybody in a cartoon who goes and lives with animals for a while, he learns a valuable lesson. He comes back to his senses. He comes back into living among humans again, like it never happened, except he's different now because he knows God could do that to me just like that. And then God could restore me back to normal just like that. I really do serve at his mercy. He really is the Most High God, right? And from then on, all people only worshiped Yahweh, and there were never any problems again, and nobody got thrown into furnaces. Not quite. We're going to jump forward in time. Years later, Nebuchadnezzar is dead. Some descendant of his, like his son or grandson or what have you, is on the throne, but he's actually away fighting a war, so his son is kind of running the kingdom while daddy is off doing all the hard work, fighting the wars, right? This is about 23 years later, actually. So Belshazzar is the son that is in charge of the kingdom while his dad is away. And he throws this big party, he has this huge banquet, and you might remember during the siege of Jerusalem, when Nebuchadnezzar came and conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, they carried off all of the valuables from the temple, from God's temple in Jerusalem, including all of these gold cups that were used in the worship of Yahweh, right, in the temple. They were very ornate, decorative gold cups, but they were used for a purpose for worshiping God in his temple, right, for the different sacrifices and things they did. And he's like, hey, didn't my grandpa get like some really cool like gold cups from one of those people groups he conquered, you know, like, let's bring those out. Let's have a party. Let's have a good time. Let's drink wine out of those. It's like, I don't really care what they were for, or, you know, they look cool. Let's go use those. Why don't we use those every day, you know? So he's throwing this party. They get out these gold cups and they're drinking from them. It says in chapter 5, verse 4, as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Right? Not even naming the gods. Not even saying what they were gods of, but like they were gods just made of metal or wood or stone. Those are the gods that they're praising as they drink wine and party and drink from cups designed for the worship of God in his temple. You see why God might have a problem with that? Right? Now they're going to start thinking that they're having too much to drink here, because in verse 5, it says, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Right? Now, this is going to sound familiar, but he can't read it. He doesn't know what it says. We're not sure exactly why, you know, like it seems to be in Aramaic, we're going to find out, but for whatever reason, he's unable to interpret it. And so he calls all his wise guys. And they can read it, right? No, of course they can't. I don't know why we keep those guys around at this point, right? Just go ahead and call Daniel. Well, he doesn't seem to know Daniel. He just calls those guys. And they don't know what it says. And, you know, the more people come in and look at it and don't have any idea what it means, the more terrified he gets. And then the queen, probably his mom, the queen, possibly his wife, but probably his mom says, well, I remember this guy named Daniel. During the time of Nebuchadnezzar, he had problems like this, and Daniel was always able to solve them. Go get this guy Daniel. Right? Now, Daniel's kind of older at this point. And in chapter 16, Belshazzar says to him, now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Third highest because he's only the second highest, because his dad is the real king. Right? So you'll be like, this is the highest position I can give you other than my own position, is you're next up after me, right? Here's what Daniel says. You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Whoa, that's more sass than we saw out of him before. You know, with Nebuchadnezzar, he's like, hey, I really wish this dream was about somebody else because you're not going to like it. Now it's like, hey, buddy, I don't need your stuff. You keep it. I'm going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. He says, nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Like, Daniel's gotten used to this by now. He's very confident. He's like, yeah, we've been down this road before. I'm not worried, right? So basically what he says is Nebuchadnezzar had great success because God is the one that made him successful. And then he got arrogant, and God humbled him. And then he acknowledged God, right? And God restored him. He says, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this, right? You knew the stories. You knew what happened to probably your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways, right? When you drank from those cups, you remembered every god you could think of that's made of rocks or metal or what have you. You know who you forgot? The God who holds your very life in his hand. The God who is in control of every step you take. You know what he did to your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. He could do the same thing to you if he wanted to. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Here's what these words mean, right? Now, these are Aramaic words. Aramaic, most of Daniel actually, or much of Daniel at least, is in Aramaic. It's kind of a cousin language to Hebrew. It's what the Babylonians speak. So mene, he says, means God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Now, we could go into more about what those words mean and why those words were used. We're going to kind of gloss over that today, but for the sake of time. It says, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. It won't last long, though, because that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So now the great Babylonian Empire has finally fallen. While dad was away fighting the wars, son lost the kingdom. He got assassinated. And now this guy Darius is the new king, and now is the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire, as historians call it. So now in chapter 6, we see Daniel. He's an old man now. And he's one of the top rulers in the kingdom. He's about to be promoted to like the top other than king, like kind of prime minister. And some other people are jealous of him, and they want to take him out. But he's such a Boy Scout. They can't find any dirt about him. Like they're trying to dig up something and make some kind of accusation, get him thrown out of his position, disqualify him in some way. They can't find anything. It says in chapter 6, verse 5, finally these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Right? There's the weak point. He's never done anything wrong that anybody can find out. But you know what he does? He's faithful to his God, even if it means defying the king. Let's exploit that, right? So basically what they do, they go to King Darius and they stroke his ego and they're like, hey, you know what we should do? Because you're so awesome, we should just make a law that like everybody has to pray to you for 30 days. You know, and like anybody who doesn't, we'll just like, I don't know, have them eaten by lions. How's that sound? Right? They say, we've all agreed that you should do this, and you should enforce it, you know, with penalty of death for the next 30 days, and that everybody has to worship you and nobody else, right? Now, your majesty, in verse 8, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, that's how their law works. We're going to see this soon, not next week, but the week after with Esther. The same kind of thing where there's some kind of weird quirk in their law that apparently the king makes a proclamation and there's no undoing it, right? So it's weird. I don't know why. But anyway, it says now in verse 10, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. 3 times a day. And Daniel's been doing this for a while, but boy, does he really mean it now. 3 times a day. He goes into his room, he opens the window that faces towards Jerusalem, his home, and where God's temple used to be. He bows down and he prays to God. 3 times a day he does this, and that's his regular practice. By the way, that's a practice that people have imitated over the years. Many Jews have started imitating that practice at different times in history, where they would bow and pray towards Jerusalem. Christians at different times have picked up on that and said, like, yeah, we should do something like that. And they'll like bow and pray towards Jerusalem. At different times throughout history, different cultures, different people have done that. Islam basically saw the Jews and Christians doing this and thought, hey, we should do something like that, except they pray towards Mecca. So if you know if you know anybody who's Muslim and daily they bow and they pray toward, like, facing towards Mecca, that's why. They got the idea ultimately from Daniel. Anyway, that's beside the point, but I just think it's interesting. So they catch Daniel praying. Daniel's, he's not going to bow down and worship Darius. Everybody knows that. It's pretty clear. But Darius, he didn't know he's being tricked. He's like, oh, wait, you were after Daniel? I was just about to promote him to be like my prime minister because he's the best. Like, I rely on that guy. He's my right-hand man. I need him. Like, I do not want to lose Daniel. I don't want to do this to him. So he tries to save him, but he can't do anything about it legally. So what they do, they have this like picture, kind of like a cave, like with kind of a pit, is probably what's going on here. They have some lions that what they would do is they would capture lions and keep them in like a cage or something, and they would use them for hunting and stuff. And anyway, it's pretty awesome in some ways, but also like kind of stupid, but whatever. They have a pit full of lions, and you got to put it to good use. Every once in a while, you got to throw somebody in there, right? So this is how they want to kill him. They want to throw him into the lion's den. So they do. They throw him in there. They seal it with a stone. The king takes his own signet ring and just like sealing a letter or something, he seals the stone with his signet ring, and all his officials do the same to say, this, we are doing this. This has my endorsement, right? Right? But Darius, the last thing he says to Daniel is, may your God rescue you. And they seal it. And then Darius, I don't know if you know this, if I'm holding a microphone and then I try to scratch my face with the same hand that's holding the microphone, you can't hear me anymore, or I get really loud and then really quiet. Anyway, just a fun fact. So he's in there. They don't know what's going to happen. So Darius, he goes home. He can't eat. He can't sleep. He's restless. None of his usual entertainment is doing the trick tonight. And he's up all night. And when dawn comes, first thing he does early in the morning, he rushes out to the tomb and he calls out to Daniel. It says at the first light of dawn, he says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angels, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. Notice what he's saying. You gave me the death penalty for an arbitrary and evil law, but you know what God said? God said, Daniel is not guilty. If anything, Daniel is the only innocent guy here. I don't care what law of yours he broke. He didn't break mine, so he lives. It is not you who decides whether I live or die. It is God who decides that. And God decided that I was not deserving of the death penalty. Right? Think of the statement there. And he says, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. You notice Daniel, the older he gets, like the more direct he gets with these kings, like the less afraid he is, like the less tactful and careful he is, and the more he's just like, nobody. God didn't want you to do it, so it did not happen. Right? And he says, nor have I ever done anything to you that you would throw me in a pit of lions. Like, I have never been disloyal to you. I did not deserve this. This was wrong. And you should like honestly man up, and you shouldn't have done this in the first place, right? It says the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Okay, no comment. Darius then decrees everybody in the empire has to worship Yahweh. And that is the story of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In this wild, weird place that they find themselves, continually challenged with, you are the odd one out. Now you better start fitting in, or we're going to do away with you in like the most creatively violent way we can think of, right? And time and again, without making a show of it, they don't make it about themselves. They're not looking for glory. They're not looking for money. They're not looking for people to adore them. You know what they do? They trust God, and they stay faithful to him, and they trust that God has their back. Maybe God will save me this time. Maybe he won't. Doesn't matter. That's up to him. Either way, he's still God, he's still good, he still loves me, he is still just, and I trust his wisdom. I trust his judgment. I know that he knows what he's doing. God doesn't save every person out of every crisis, nor does he have to, nor do we deserve it. But if we're faithful to God, in the end, we'll be all right, and he'll take care of us, and things will turn out okay in the end. And I mean, when I say in the end, I mean the end. And that brings us to the rest of Daniel. We're not going to even really scratch the surface of it, but the rest of Daniel, we've got 6 more chapters of it. It's all prophecy and visions that Daniel has. It's a really cool prayer that Daniel gives to God. And it's basically Daniel having these visions and then, angels interpreting the visions for him. And it's really cool stuff. If you read it, you'll be like, wow, I feel like I'm reading the book of Revelation. Well, that's on purpose. Revelation quotes Daniel extensively and a lot of other things from the Old Testament too. But anyway, you read it, and there's a lot of prophecies about the future, and there's different interpretations about a lot of those prophecies. We won't get into it, of course, with our time today. But the purpose of it all, just like the story of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the story is God, and nobody else is like him. There are no other gods. It's just him. There is no king who is above him. There is no king that God could not snap his fingers and wipe off the face of the earth or turn him into a wild animal or what have you if God wanted to. Everything that any human being does is at God's mercy in allowing us to continue doing that. We will continue to see evil and wicked people in positions of power who do evil things with their power. We will continue to see that in our lives. We will continue to face situations where following Jesus, being faithful to God, just like with Daniel and his friends, gets us, makes us look like outsiders or worse, gets us killed, gets us hurt, gets us attacked in some way. We pay some kind of price for it. That's going to happen in your life. And there will be a time and a place where God shows his presence and demonstrates who he is by rescuing you from that. And there will be times where God, in his wisdom, chooses not to. Let's, like Daniel and his 3 amigos, we get that notice that here we go again. The king wants to kill somebody because the wise guys can't figure it out. Let's get down and pray. Let's trust God. When the king calls us in and says, hey, you're going to comply or you're going to be dead, in the most creative way I can think of, to say no. No, I'm going to be faithful to my God. Maybe he'll deliver me from this. Maybe he won't. In the end, though, he's going to win. Your time is limited. And if you're smart, Mr. King, you will recognize that, and you will turn, and you will worship the God that I worship, and you will serve him too. And maybe you won't, and you'll face consequences for what you've done. But I, for one, am not going to give God anything to hold against me. I'm going to trust in his mercy and his love and his grace, and I'm going to be faithful to him, and I'm going to trust that he is going to do what is best with this situation. And whatever happens to us, happens to us. I don't want to be too nonchalant about that, because that's not nothing. To follow Jesus, there will come a time where you are going to sacrifice something. You're going to sacrifice respect from people. You're going to sacrifice maybe money, financial opportunities, career opportunities. You might lose family or friends, people that you care about that are not willing to accept the fact that you love Jesus and you're going to put him first in your life. You might run into that in your life. That's a real thing. And there have been people serving God throughout all of human history and all cultures who have faced that. We're not immune. We're not special that we shouldn't have to go through that. It could happen to us. It could happen that someday, if the Chinese send enough balloons over us, or who knows what's going on, but it could happen one way or another that someday we find ourselves living in a place where Christians are actively persecuted. It's possible. It's not unthinkable. Let's be the kind of people now that, if that ever happens, would be able to stand up before rulers and authorities and say, no, I'm going to be faithful to your boss and not to you. I'm going to be faithful to the God who could take you out in an instant if he wanted to. I'm going to trust him. And maybe he'll save me from this current crisis. Maybe he won't. But in the end, he wins, and I want to be on his side. And he loves me, and he loves you, and he's good to us. And if we trust in him, his way really is better. And he only wants good things for us. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, give us the faith and the courage of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Make us into the kind of people that could say the things they did, do the things they did. Lord, to stand up even before kings, in the face of fire, in the face of lions, in the face of whatever crisis, whatever problem shows its face to us, Lord. Give us the wisdom to navigate these weird and uncertain times that we live in. Teach us to know you and to trust you, to understand what you want for us. Make us more like Jesus. Help us to be obedient and faithful to you, so that if a time of crisis arises, or when a time of crisis arises, we'll trust you in that, and we'll remain faithful to you in that. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Love you guys. Have a great week. Next Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, 5:30, right here. We're going to have pizza. Feel free to bring a drink or a side or a snack or a dessert or what have you if you'd like to. But we're going to have the game up on the screens. We're going to have, bring your favorite board games or card games or whatever. Probably no gambling, we'll say. Probably no gambling or alcohol. But otherwise, we're going to have a good time. We're going to eat good food and hang out together. Megan and Ashley have been working on some fun stuff for the kids. So this is a kid-friendly event. It's not like you have to babysit your own kids the whole time. There are people that do that for you. Isn't that great? I'm just kidding. But it's going to be a good time for everybody involved. We're going to have a lot of fun. So 5:30 next Sunday. We hope to see you there. Oh, also church next Sunday at 10 a.m., the usual time. So there's that too.
And